So usually in certain circumstances or in certain groups or settings, you might find that you start acting in a certain way, either as the leader or as the follower, or you start keeping quiet on certain issues. So there is this kind of undercurrents or unsaid or perhaps even known power dynamics that do exist. And let us today explore more on how to break free of this, and some ideas, and hopefully, we can all be more mindful and more conscious in how we act in such situations. So I guess the first thing that to look at the root of why we get caught up in this power dynamics in the first place is maybe due to the self-worth. So that in a case where our self-worth is tied to things that you feel weaker in, and for things that others are stronger in, there's this tendency to put them on a pedestal, to see them as higher up or better. So ideally, if you can untie this link and not base your self-worth on things that you're weaker in, or put people up on a pedestal if they're better in something, then it would really free you up to try and view the situation and to act in ways that might not necessarily be tied to how you are, in a way, conditioned to or supposed to behave. Yep. So for myself, this is something that is still an ideal, something that I'm still working towards. And when I find that, I kind of tie my own self-worth to things that I feel weaker in or stronger in even, then it becomes like a mindful catch each time. And to decide, in each scenario, how do I want to work with it, and do I want to continue with the same game that is happening unconsciously. So right now we're going to share a few examples on your own experience of breaking free or being free from some of these power dynamics, in be it your workplace or even in your family.
Yeah, so for my case, I have one interesting example. So I think sometimes it's hard for you to break free from societal power dynamics all by yourself. So sometimes you can use a little bit of assistance, or you can kind of orchestrate an opportunity for yourself to, change the situation that you're in. So personally, for myself, I kind of came upon it by chance. So I think some of our listeners might know that I'm currently working in Korea. So I kind of moved countries from Singapore to Korea in June last year. And very interesting, because I'm currently working full-time in Korea in a MNC, but nevertheless still in a very Korean environment. And you do know that the Singapore corporate environment and the Korea corporate environment is pretty different as well. So the whole context is that changing country actually gave me the freedom to kind of reinvent myself or act in a different way, because nobody really knew who I was in Korea. And also being a foreigner, I kind of had the free pass, because I wasn't expected to act as a Korean, and I could kind of be whoever I wanted to. Yeah. So I really took the opportunity to rewrite my story and build my own narrative from scratch as well. So I think some context for our listeners: in Korea, the workplace culture tends really to be pretty hierarchical, with some companies going by Korean titles. So, if you watch Korean drama, you know that they would say like, oh, 부장님 or 차장님, 과장님. So they have a lot of these kind of titles that kind of put people in their place based on their seniority, which is largely determined by their age or their years of experience as well. So because I was a foreigner in Korea, it was really hard for them to place me in any category, because I didn't really fulfill the same job title and salary range, even though maybe I was a bit younger. I was my salary was a little bit higher than what they would normally peg a normal Korean employee. Yeah. So because of that, and also because I spoke in English to my colleagues, so the language also kind of plays a difference. And my language, the English language itself, didn't really reflect the power dynamics properly. So in Korean, because they can call you by all the Korean titles, but in English they call everyone by name. So because of that, the hierarchy kind of became a bit flatter as well. And this whole experience really helped me to look at societal power dynamics from a third party perspective, because I was there in the moment, but I could take a step back and look at it from a wider perspective, and I could also make a conscious choice on which kind of norm to follow and which norm not to follow. So sometimes when I noticed that my Korean colleagues needed the kind of respect and they are used to the respect, I can choose to give the respect, or like by bowing or addressing them by the terminologies. But I could also choose not to, and I had that kind of power because I was a foreigner in this environment. Yep. So I could write my own narrative, and it's a really rare opportunity because sometimes, even though you may be able to observe very clearly what's happening around you, society might expect you to act in a certain way, and it's hard for you to extract yourself from the situation. So I think I was very blessed to be given this opportunity to not only observe properly with a set of fresh eyes, but also act according to what I believe was appropriate in that moment. Yeah, so that's a bit of my story. I do know that Li-Xuan has her own story as well in terms of changing her environment and perspectives.
Yeah, but before I go into that, I'm just curious for 𝗫𝘂. When you are free of this hierarchy, what did it free you up to do, or in terms of your work, how did that change versus when you were working in Singapore?
Well, that's a fantastic question, actually. So, in Singapore, I mean, there's some kind of backstory, right? Backstory there, but in Singapore, I mean, I'm still kind of pretty young, so I'm not like very senior in my organization. And in Singapore, because of how I started, I was kind of quieter because I felt like I couldn't really speak up against the seniors in the group, even though in my company, we're already very flat and actually everybody's encouraged to speak up. But it was just my own kind of inhibition that I wasn't able to be free of what I expected of myself. And that's why I kept really pretty quiet in Singapore. However, when I moved over to Korea, I felt like, hey, I had the opportunity to speak up. I could say, I could talk directly to the senior leaders, while maybe the other Koreans could not. I could share my views with them and wouldn't be judged. So I felt like I was actually liberated in the environment, and I adopted my real personality a lot more. So I became a lot more bubbly, I became a lot more proactive. I volunteered my time and my energy and my ideas, and I managed to execute end to end quite a few activities. And because of that, my Korean boss was really impressed, and then she was really happy about what I did. And then it kind of made me reflect, like, hey, I should be doing this from the start. If this is my nature, I'm actually celebrated for being who I am. So why was it that I didn't dare to do so when I was in Singapore? Yeah, so it really brought a lot of moments of reflection.
And say if you do have a chance to come back to Singapore, do you think it would be different for you?
Yeah, I mean, definitely. So I think another point of reflection, maybe a little bit line to this, right, is about, can you change who you portray yourself to be in an environment where people already know you? So that's another question, because currently my Singaporean colleagues know who I am or how I behave, right? So is it possible for me to go back to the same environment but be somebody else or be different? Yeah, so I always thought about that ever since I was young, and I always wonder, you can be whoever you want to be at any moment in time. You don't need to tie to society's perspective of you or their understanding of you, because everyone can grow and everyone can improve themselves at any moment in time. But then a lot of times we are so afraid, and then we just hold on to what we have already shown the world, and that's why we never really grow out of that shell. Yeah, so definitely, if given an opportunity, I would speak up more, and I would really just be myself, even back in the Singapore office.
Yeah, that's really interesting. And as you were saying, it brought me to remember when this one is more like when I was a student. So when I was studying in a Singapore-based university, so I was from NTU. So our culture was that the lecturer speaks and everyone just listens. So the lecturer asks any questions and then there'll be silence and the lecturer continues. So usually that's the usual case. And we were engineering students, right? So we're even more like studious and really listening to the lecture, or most of the things we try to figure it out on our own after the lecture if there's any questions. So this time, then during my exchange program, when I went to the US, I found that the culture was very different. People were, in a way, interrupting the lecturer to ask questions whenever certain points were not brought across clearly. And as a result, each lecturer was very good in their presentation. So the way they explained, the way they brought across points was very clear. And if it was not clear, it would be clarified on the spot, and students would make sure that they understand what's going on. And so when I came back to Singapore, and I realized that there were so many things in the lecture that I didn't understand, as usual. And this time I actually raised my hand to ask a question. And it was the first time I sat in the middle of like this 100 people lecture hall, and I was like in the middle row, and I asked my question all the way down to the front. Like I just really spoke up and I asked my question, and I started asking questions in tutorials. And even though these are the same batchmates that knew me from before my exchange program, but because of this experience that it is possible to ask questions and it is not wrong, it really brought a very different experience to my university life after the exchange program. So that was very interesting. Yeah.
That's really interesting to hear. That reminds me of my partner when he came back from France, because he worked in France for 1 year. He actually started to say hi to all the bus drivers and everybody that he meets. He'll just say good morning or good afternoon, because that's like super normal for people in France. Yeah, so I think he was a little like he took some getting used to back to the Singaporean culture and blended back into society by not saying this anymore because everybody looked at him a bit weirdly when he greeted them.
Yeah, I understand. Even when I was in the US, it was normal before you leave the bus to say thank you, and then you leave the bus. And everyone says that. So when I came back to Singapore for a while, I was doing that as well. But I feel it's very nice to say hi to the bus driver. So I still try and say hi to the bus drivers when I get onto the bus. Yeah, or good morning to them. And I find that they appreciate that. Most of the times they are like invisible to everybody. Everyone just gets on the bus and sits down. Yeah, but I don't think I picked up the guts yet to say thank you. In a culture where if you say thank you, everybody look at you weirdly. Okay. So I think I'd like to share next on how I broke free of some of the corporate kind of rankings. So being in Singapore and being in Asia, a lot of times there is a rank of seniority based on the number of years you have been in the company or your rank in terms of maybe you're the manager or you're the senior manager and things like that. So usually the leaders or the managers will take the decision, and the staff or the team will follow the decision. And during meetings and stuff, asking questions and giving comments is not very common, and most people just try to follow whatever the leader wants and try to make it happen. So it's a very harmonious way of working, which is good, like very harmony. But at the same time, if there are different points of view that could be quite valid, they don't really get voiced out. So that kind of slows down a bit on the process improvement as well. So I started my career in corporate. I was also following the rules. I found myself being very quiet. So during meetings, everyone kept quiet. So I also kept quiet. And when there are certain things I felt was a bit weird or I didn't understand, and everyone also kept quiet, then I also kept quiet. So I didn't ask a lot of questions, and I just try to do whatever I can within my scope. I might ask privately, and if there's no answer, I just let it go and I don't pursue that further and just keep to the norm. Then after that, I went onto a route of doing my own business and setting up different businesses. So mainly all in the self-improvement, healing space, meditation space. And I think one very important lesson I learned in business is that everything is in my scope. Whether or not it's in my scope, that I have a part to play and I have a responsibility for the consequences. If I'm a member and something is wrong and I don't speak up and the team goes down the wrong track, I am responsible. If our leader makes a mistake and I let it happen and I don't voice out or don't try and do something to make things better and we go down the wrong path, that is also part of my responsibility. So I think the business experience really helped me to step out of I am just responsible for what I am, officially responsible for. And to be very free of this, and to be very free to switch roles when needed. So I can switch between the team leader, the team member, the sub-team leader, and things like that. So that started becoming possible. So when I decided that, apart from running my business, I'm also going to take time to step back into the workforce and work back in a corporate structure. This time I found that I was a lot more free of the power dynamics. So as a new person, when I saw that there was something wrong systematically, I could voice it out to my seniors. I still respected their power dynamics because I understand that's how things work. But I would voice it out to the right person, and then I would make things happen. That means I'll drive the change and make the change happen. So I started really taking more initiative to find solutions instead of just keeping to my job scope. And when there are extra projects that come in that is so-called beyond my job scope, I don't get angsty or angry about it. And to me, it's like, okay, new experience, let's do it, and let's see how it can help. So the kind of the sense of responsibility and the sense of what I can do expanded beyond just my scope into also helping, say, other departments with their work or going beyond that. And this was very, very positive, not just for my team or for my work or results, but also in terms of my own mental health and well-being at work. Like I was a lot more focused on creating and implementing solutions and not just limited to my job scope. And sometimes I had to remember that, oh, this is not in my job scope, so don't put too much time into it because the boss might value, the actual job scope itself. So to kind of balance that out. Yeah, so I think this all in all, this experience of stepping out of the corporate structure, it really instilled a new sense of responsibility, a bigger perspective, and that is and was very helpful in the current work that I do. Yeah. Audrey has experienced startup life, which is very different, and there is more of a flat structure. Audrey, would you like to share more?
Yeah, so since graduation, I've been working in like startups or tech companies. So usually in tech companies, the culture is very free. Like there's no hierarchy, and most of the time, my peers as well as my boss, we are around the same age. Yeah, so we call each other by our names. And when there's something, I think in my last company, what's interesting is, right, uh, like I have a colleague, he's very vocal. I mean, like I thought that most of us are quite vocal already, but he's even more vocal. Sometimes he might get into heated argument with my bosses, and at the point in time, I felt like, wow, it seems a bit too much. But afterwards, right, actually it seems fine. Like even though argument is a bit heated, but after a while, everyone is okay again because we all know that we are working towards a common goal, like want to see certain improvement in a company, and no one really take all this argument or discussion very personal because we all know that it's for the work objectives. Yeah. So I think so far I've never really worked in a super structured corporate environment before. Yeah. I guess going back to a question on how can you break free from societal power dynamics and make a more conscious choice. So breaking free from societal power dynamics, my personal belief is we can choose the kind of environment that I want to work in and the kind of person that I want to be. So by having this kind of by having this choice, we are able to kind of work backwards and decide where we want to work, what kind of culture do we prefer, and just make a decision and move forward. And sometimes, right, we just got to try, experiment, test it, and iterate it. Because like if we never try, we never know like what kind of environment is suitable for us. Yeah, some people they might enjoy the corporate environment, whereas some people may enjoy the startup and tech environment. Yeah, so it really depends on individual. Just try and update our mental models and beliefs constantly.
Yeah, thanks so much for sharing. Audrey, I'm just curious to know when you mentioned that there is a flat hierarchy. So how is it like in such an environment? Is it like anyone can talk to anybody, or how is it like?
I think this depends on company size. In my previous company, it's just like around 40 people. So wherever we have questions, we just go straight to the person in charge because we all know who is in charge of what. Now in my current company, it's slightly bigger, like around 1,200. Most of the time, I don't really know who to find. Yeah, so we have a support channel, like this kind of like channel with a lot of people. You just ask a question there, and somehow someone will reply you. Yeah. Then flat culture as in, because it's not top down one. Like so far, I never experienced like top down culture like while working in tech companies. It's more of like, oh, like managers or bosses, they will say, oh, this is our goal. How can we reach it? Then they let you sort out like the details that you need to work on. So they don't tell you, oh, step 1 to step 10, you need to do that. There's some guidance, but it's not like, oh, you must definitely do this. It's always open for discussion. Whatever ideas you have, just raise it and just do it. Yeah.
I see. So in terms of like not so much governance on how things must be done, but you're more like free to find your ways to hit the targets and the goals.
Yeah. I think this also depends on business. Because when last time in one of my internship, I worked in a big MNC. Wow, it's super there's a lot of hierarchy, have a lot of approval process because the nature of the company is in geotechnical consultancy. So in this kind of industry, it's regulated. If something goes wrong, right, then because they have to sign off with the name, then if something goes wrong, they have to bear a huge responsibility. So they ensure certain checks in place to make sure that nothing goes wrong. But in a startup, there's no playbook. There's no like rules that say that, oh, you must do this and that. It's more of like try and experiment to see what works in business. And most of the time, my boss also don't know the answer. Yeah. Yeah, which is the fun part, I guess. Because personally, I don't really like to like do routine stuff, like from every day keep doing the same thing. Because there's no innovation. Yeah. So yeah, so I guess everyone just have to find out what's suitable for yourself and what's not suitable. If you don't like it, just try to change the environment, yeah, or change the beliefs that you have that's causing you the pain.
I think I have another point I wanted to add. I just got inspired in the conversation, not sure at which point. So I think one more thing that you can do to kind of have power even though you don't have actual power. So basically like try to not really neutralize power, but portray your own sense of power, is that I realized that actually speaking from a very logical perspective really helps. I mean, not that you are void of emotion, but kind of making your stand or making your case using logic is actually very, very impactful and powerful. So I realized one thing about myself is that I tend to kind of not want to fight back when people kind of tell me certain things. So whenever my colleagues, maybe a little bit more senior colleagues or my boss tell me a certain thing, I tend to just follow and without really like processing very deeply about whether what they're saying makes sense. But then I realized that actually once I kind of like take things back and then mull over it and then come up with a logical statement or rebuttal, then actually my thoughts are usually taken very favorably into account. And then they would actually kind of say, oh yeah, actually let's go with your idea. So I think the being able to influence people actually really relies on a very strong sense of logic. But of course, that's not to say that you are only logical, because in the end you still need emotions to connect to people. So like what Audrey was saying, right, you building relationships and friendships is the emotional part of it. But then being able to, using that strong foundation of friendship, you tell them your logic, then that's like the double power. So I think, yeah, you really need both, the ability to connect with people and the ability to convince them using like hard facts.
Yeah, makes sense. Yeah, thanks so much for sharing that, Kenny. Yeah, and I think one more thing that I'd like to add on in terms of overcoming this power dynamics is that, you know, areas that you're weak in, usually we tend to be quite powerless in these areas. And it is about, you know, being able to identify which are the areas that you're weak in. So this is not just at work, but also in personal relationships. So you identify the area that you're weak in, and then you work on it, and you at least try to do something such that you overcome this sense of helplessness and powerlessness, and I can't do it. You have to like, okay, I'm working on it. So I'd like to give an example. So one of my weaknesses is in finance. So I tend to get very lost when I see a lot of financial related things, and then even though I am able to understand it, but my ability to apply it is not very strong. It doesn't come naturally to me. So I tend to just let it be, you know. So whoever is in the group, or even with my romantic relationship or in my family, if there's someone taking charge of finance, then I just, you know, hands off and let them take charge. But what I started shifting was to try and change how I view it, and start to take more ownership and start to take more actions to really look at the finance and work on it, even in the little ways that I can, and to learn what I can. And I found that to be very helpful. Then I stopped being in this hazy, I don't know, I can't do anything zone. Another area that I also started working on is say cooking. Yep. So for quite some time, I thought that I cannot cook, and so I was always automatically taking up the assistant role in the kitchen. You know, the role that says, "Oh, you want me to cut vegetable? I'll cut the vegetable. You want me to wash this? I'll wash this. I'll wash the dishes." So basically, not taking the main chef role. And as so my partner recognized that, and he started giving me opportunities to take charge in the cooking. Like he would just let me handle the kitchen and say, "Okay, today you decide whatever you want and you cook." And that really helped to give me that space, and that I started to learn that, hey, I can do it, and I can at least cook something simple, or when I want to cook something a bit nicer, I can figure it out and I can do it. And this was very, very helpful in learning that, you know, in areas that I thought I'm weak in, if I just give myself the space. In this case, it was supported, and the space was given to me when I didn't give it to myself. But, you know, if can, you know, you give yourself that space to learn it, and you will figure out that maybe it's not so difficult after all. Yeah. Okay. And I think one more thing I like to add on is also when things are, when you feel like your power is less, you tend to negotiate less. So you tend to just, okay, I'll go with the decision, whatever you say is right, and you tend to not voice out your own opinions. So that happened to me a lot, and I started to, I guess, also learn what Kylie was doing. Sometimes, you know, at work, I'll just take the decision back, and then I'll go and mull over it. And then after that, I come back with a more solid case before I say it and to bring it across. Or in cases, even in family and all that, I realized that at the most powerless point, it is very difficult to voice out. And if I do voice out, it tends to come across wrongly. So if I take a step back and think about it, and then figure out how I can do it better next time, and when the situation comes again, or when I have a chance, then I speak up my point, then it tends to go across much better.